My name is Mildred, and at 72 years old, I never imagined I would find myself crouched in my own bedroom closet, heart pounding like a frightened rabbit. But sometimes life forces you into the most unexpected corners, both literally and figuratively. It all began on that humid Tuesday afternoon in July. My son Harold had been married to Beatrice for 8 years. And if I'm being honest, those years felt like decades. That woman had a way of making me feel invisible in my own home, the very house where I had raised Harold after his father passed when he was just 12. I had retreated to my bedroom after another one of Beatrice's pointed comments about old people who overstay their welcome. The sting of her words was still fresh when I heard the front door creak open, thinking Harold had returned early from work. I was about to call out when I heard Beatrice's voice, hushed and urgent. Chester, you shouldn't be here so early. What if Harold comes home? Chester. My blood ran cold. Chester Pemberton was the mailman, a married man with 3 children and a reputation that should have stayed buried with his grandfather's generation. Without thinking, I slipped into my closet, leaving the door slightly ajar. What I witnessed next would change everything. Through the narrow gap. I watched as Beatrice led Chester into my living room, the same room where Harold's father and I had celebrated 25 years of marriage, where we had watched Harold take his first steps, where family memories lived in every piece of furniture. Beatrice, darling. Chester's voice was thick with desire. I can't stand sneaking around like this anymore. When are you going to leave him? My daughter-in-law, the woman who had convinced my son that I was a burden, laughed coldly. Leave him, Chester, you sweet fool. Why would I leave a man who's about to inherit everything when his mother finally... Well, when nature takes its course. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the closet door frame to keep from falling. But I thought you loved me. Chester protested, his voice carrying the wounded tone of a man who had finally realized he was being used. I do enjoy our time together, Beatrice purred, running her fingers down his chest. But love doesn't pay the bills, Chester. Harold's mother won't live forever, and when she's gone, this house, her savings, her jewelry, it all becomes ours. Then we can be together properly. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. 43 years I had lived in this house. 43 years of memories, of love. Of building a life that this woman was now planning to inherit and enjoy with her lover. What if she finds out about us? Chester asked, glancing nervously toward the stairs. Beatrice's laugh was like ice cracking. That old bat? She can barely hear the television without her hearing aid. Besides, she spends most of her time in that garden talking to her roses like they're people. Harold thinks she's getting senile. Senile. I tended that garden with the same care I had tended my family. Those roses were my pride and joy, and talking to plants was scientifically proven to help them grow. But to Beatrice, everything I did was evidence of my declining mental state. I still think we should be more careful, Chester insisted. Harold's not stupid. Harold sees what I want him to see, Beatrice replied confidently. I've spent 8 years convincing him that his mother is becoming a burden. He's already talking about looking into assisted living options. Once she's out of the way, we'll have the run of this place. If you're finding this story as shocking as I did living through it, please consider joining our community by hitting that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be heard, and your support helps us continue sharing real experiences that matter. The conversation continued, each word cutting deeper than the last. They discussed their plans in detail, how Beatrice would gradually convince Harold that I was becoming dangerous to myself, how she would suggest that the stress of caring for me was affecting their marriage, how Chester would conveniently be there to help with the difficult transition. And the best part? Beatrice continued. settling herself on Chester's lap in Harold's favorite armchair. Is that Harold will be so grateful for my sacrifice in dealing with his mother that he'll never question anything. I'll be the devoted wife who endured so much. Chester kissed her neck. You're brilliant, Beatrice. But what if she doesn't go quietly? Oh, she will, Beatrice said with chilling certainty. I've already started putting ideas in Harold's head about her episodes. A fall down the stairs, wandering off and getting lost, forgetting to turn. Off the stove, these things happen to old people all the time. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely keep my grip on the closet door. This woman who had eaten at my table, who had received my Christmas gifts, who had hugged me at family gatherings, was casually discussing my demise as if it were a dinner menu. They spent another hour in my living room, making plans and sharing. Intimacies that defiled every sacred memory that space held. When they finally left, I remained in that closet for what felt like hours, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had heard. But here's the thing about being 72 years old, you don't survive 7 decades without learning a thing or two about resilience. After the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Determination. I may have been hiding in a closet. I wasn't going to remain a victim. The next morning, I began my own investigation. While Beatrice was out shopping, probably. Meeting Chester, I searched through her belongings. In her jewelry box, hidden beneath a false bottom, I found love letters from Chester dating back to years. In her purse, I discovered a second cell phone, one Harold didn't know about. But the most damning evidence came from her laptop. Beatrice had been careless with her passwords, using Harold's birthday for everything. What I found in her search? History chilled me to the bone. How to prove someone has dementia. Legal requirements for guardianship, selling property after death. And most disturbing of all, untraceable ways to cause accidents in elderly people. I printed everything. Every email, every search, every piece of evidence that proved my daughter-in-law was planning not just to steal my life, but potentially to end it. But I knew that simply presenting this evidence to Harold wouldn't be enough. Beatrice had spent 8 years poisoning his mind against me. I needed a different approach. That's when I remembered Margaret Ashworth, my dear friend from church, who worked as a private investigator before retiring. Margaret had always said that the best way to catch a cheater was to let them catch themselves. Mildred, Margaret said. When I called her, what you're describing is more than adultery. This woman is planning to commit fraud at minimum and possibly worse. We need to be very careful about how we handle this. Margaret helped me set up a small recording device in the living room, hidden inside the antique music box that had belonged to my mother. She also arranged for a professional photographer to discreetly document Chester's visits. For 3 weeks, I gathered evidence. I documented every lie Beatrice told Harold about my supposed confusion. I recorded her phone conversations with Chester. I photographed them together when they thought I was napping. The hardest part was pretending to be the senile old woman Beatrice was painting me as. When she would tell Harold about my episodes, I had to bite my tongue instead of defending myself. When she suggested I might be safer in a care facility, I had to nod along as if I were considering it. But the most difficult moment came when Harold sat me down for what he called a serious conversation about your future, Mom. I'm worried about you, he said, his eyes filled with genuine concern that broke my heart. Beatrice says, you've been having some problems, forgetting things, getting confused about time. I looked at my son, this man I had raised with, all the love in my heart, and saw how completely Beatrice had manipulated him. He truly believed he was being caring and responsible. What kind of problems? I asked gently. She says you left the stove on all night last Tuesday, Harold continued, and that you forgot you had already eaten dinner and made a second meal. Mom, I'm scared something might happen to you. Asterisk, I knew for certain that neither of these things had happened. On Tuesday night, I had been in my room reading by 9 o'clock. And I always made my meals at the same time each day, a habit formed over 40 years of structured living. Asterisk, Harold. I said carefully, do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to quit school to join that band? Asterisk, he smiled despite his worry. The Thunderbolts. We thought we were going to be the next Beatles. Asterisk, and what did I tell you? K. Asterisk, you said that following dreams was important, but that I needed to be smart about it. You made me promise to finish high school first, and if I still wanted to pursue music after graduation, you'd support me. Asterisk, did I try to control your decision, or did I give you the tools to make a good choice yourself? Asterisk, Harold's brow furrowed. You gave me the tools. You always did that. You never made decisions for me. You helped me learn to make good decisions. For myself. Asterisk, so tell me, son, in all your years of knowing me, have I ever been anything but thoughtful and deliberate about important matters? Asterisk, he was quiet for a long moment. No, Mom. You've always been the most practical person I know. Asterisk, then. I need you to trust me now when I tell you that my mind is as sharp as it's ever been. And I need you to trust me when I say that there are things happening in this house that you need to know about. Asterisk, that night I told Harold everything. I showed him the evidence, played him the recordings, and watched as his world crumbled around him. The man who had trusted his wife completely was forced to confront the reality that she had been systematically planning to destroy his mother and steal his inheritance. Asterisk, Harold's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of explosive anger, he became very quiet, very still. He listened to every recording twice, examined every photograph, read every email. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Asterisk, she really hates you, doesn't she? Asterisk, I don't think it's personal hatred, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I felt. I think I'm simply an obstacle to what she wants. The house, the money, the freedom to be with Chester without hiding. Asterisk, how long have you known? Asterisk, 3 weeks. Since I overheard them planning. Asterisk, Harold looked at me with new eyes, not as the confused old woman Beatrice had painted, but as the strong, intelligent mother who had raised him. What do you want to do? Asterisk, before you continue reading this incredible story, I'd encourage you to become part of our community by clicking that subscribe button. These real-life stories of courage and resilience deserve to be shared. And your subscription helps us reach more people who need to hear them. Asterisk, what I wanted was justice. But more than that, I wanted my son to see the truth and make his own decisions about his future. I didn't want to be the bitter mother-in-law who destroyed his marriage. I wanted to be the mother who gave him the information he needed to save himself. Asterisk, we decided to confront Beatrice together. But not in the way you might expect. Harold suggested we stage a situation where Beatrice would reveal herself naturally, without being able to claim she was being set up or manipulated. Asterisk, the plan was elegantly simple. Harold would come home early from work and catch Beatrice and Chester together, but he would pretend to believe whatever story she told him. Meanwhile, I would be secretly recording everything from my strategically positioned hiding spot. Not in a closet this time, but behind the kitchen door where I could see and hear everything clearly. Asterisk, on the appointed day, everything went according to plan. Harold's key turned in the lock at exactly 2 o'clock. Beatrice and Chester scrambled to look innocent, but they had been caught in an embrace that was impossible to explain away. Asterisk, Harold. Beatrice exclaimed, her face flushed. You're home early. Asterisk, Chester was just helping me move some furniture. She continued, gesturing vaguely toward the living room where nothing had been moved. Asterisk, Harold played his part perfectly. It's very kind of you, Chester. I hope it wasn't too much trouble. Asterisk, no trouble at all. Chester stammered, clearly nervous. always happy to help a neighbor. Asterisk, but then Harold did something we hadn't planned. Instead of pretending to believe them, he sat down calmly and said, "Actually, I'm glad you're both here. We need to have a conversation." Asterisk Beatrice's face went pale. What kind of conversation? Asterisk Harold pulled out his phone and began playing one of the recordings I had made. Beatrice's voice filled the room. That old bat. She can barely hear the television without her hearing aid. Asterisk, the silence that followed was deafening. Chester looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed. Without making a sound, asterisk, "I have 3 weeks' worth of evidence," Harold said quietly. "Recordings, photographs, emails, search histories. I know everything, Beatrice. Everything." What happened next surprised me more than anything else in this entire ordeal. Instead of denying it or making excuses, Beatrice looked directly at Harold and said, "Good. I'm tired of pretending." The mask had finally come off completely. "Your mother is a miserable old woman who has made my life hell for 8 years. She continued with vicious honesty. She's clingy, demanding, and she treats this house like it's still. 1975. I couldn't have a conversation with my husband without her inserting herself into it. I couldn't rearrange a single piece of furniture without her acting like I was committing sacrilege." Asterisk, I listened from behind the door, finally hearing what Beatrice really thought of me. While her words stung, there was something almost liberating about knowing where I truly stood. Asterisk, so you decided to have an affair and plot to get rid of her? Harold asked. Asterisk, I decided to take control of my own life, Beatrice shot back. Chester appreciates me. He doesn't expect me to worship at the altar of his dead father's memory or pretend that his mother is some kind of saint. Asterisk Chester, apparently realizing that this conversation was going nowhere good for him, tried to leave. "I should go." Asterisk sit down, Chester, Harold said firmly. "You're part of this mess, and you're going to hear how it ends." Asterisk Harold stood up and began pacing. His hands clasped behind his back in a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was working through a difficult problem. Asterisk, here's what's going to happen, he said finally. "Beatrice, you're going to pack your things and leave this house today. Chester, you're going to tell your wife about this affair, or I will. And both of you are going to stay away from my mother and me." Asterisk, you can't throw me out, Beatrice protested. "I'm your wife. I have rights." Asterisk, you have the right to a divorce settlement, Harold replied, "which will be significantly smaller than it might have been considering the evidence of adultery and your plans to defraud my mother. Asterisk, I never actually did anything to your mother. Asterisk, planning to commit a crime is still a crime, Beatrice. And suggesting ways to cause accidents for elderly people crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. Asterisk. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Beatrice's lawyer tried to argue that she had been misunderstood, but the evidence was overwhelming. The divorce was granted, and Beatrice received only what the law required. A fraction of what she might have gotten if she hadn't been caught planning to steal my inheritance. Asterisk Chester's wife divorced him as well. And he eventually moved to another state. I heard through the church grapevine that he found work as a delivery driver, a significant step down from his postal service position. Asterisk, but this story isn't really about revenge or justice, though both were served. It's about what happened after. The dust settled. Asterisk Harold and I had long conversations about trust, about family, about the assumptions we make about the people we love. He apologized repeatedly for believing Beatrice's lies about my mental state. But I reminded him that a loving son wanting to protect his mother isn't something to apologize for. Asterisk, I should have trusted my own observations. He said one evening, as we sat in the garden among my roses, "Known you my whole life. I should have known you weren't becoming senile." Asterisk gaslighting is a powerful thing, I replied. Beatrice was very skilled at making her lies sound like loving concern. Even I started to question myself sometimes. Asterisk, we redesigned our living arrangement to give us both more independence and privacy. Harold converted the basement into a small apartment for himself, complete with its own entrance, kitchen, and living area. I kept the main house, but made it clear that he was always welcome in any part of it. Asterisk, the house felt different after Beatrice left, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. I resumed my normal routines without having to worry about being criticized or monitored. Harold started bringing friends over again, something he had rarely done during his marriage. Asterisk 6. Months after the divorce was finalized, Harold started dating again. He was cautious this time, more aware of red flags, more trusting of his own instincts. When he introduced me to Eleanor, a widow from his office who shared his love of hiking and old movies, I could see immediately that this was a different kind of relationship. Asterisk, Eleanor treated me with genuine respect and kindness. But more importantly, she didn't try to insert herself between Harold and me. She understood that a good marriage enhances family relationships rather than destroying them. Asterisk, now. 2 years later, Harold and Eleanor are engaged, and I couldn't be happier. Eleanor has children of her own from her first marriage, and they've welcomed me as a grandmother figure with open arms. Our family has grown rather than contracted, and love has multiplied rather than being divided. Asterisk, if you've been moved by this story of family resilience and the power of truth, please consider subscribing to support more content like this. Real stories of real people overcoming real challenges are important to share, and your support makes that possible. Asterisk, looking back on that terrifying afternoon when I hid in my closet and overheard Beatrice's cruel plans, I realize that sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the catalysts for the best changes. If I hadn't discovered her betrayal, I might have spent years being slowly eroded by her psychological manipulation. Harold might have lost his inheritance to a woman who despised his mother and was using him for financial security. Asterisk, instead, we both learned valuable lessons about trust, communication, and the importance of believing in ourselves even when others tried to convince us we're wrong. Asterisk, I still tend my roses every morning, and yes, I still talk to them. But now I do it with the confidence of a woman who knows she's not senile, not a burden, and not invisible. I'm a survivor, a fighter, and most importantly, still here to love my family and be loved in return. Asterisk, the closet where I once hid in fear has been converted into a reading nook where I enjoy mystery novels, though I've had enough real life mystery to last several lifetimes. Sometimes Eleanor and I sit there together, sharing stories about our lives and our children, building the kind of relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law that I had always hoped for but never experienced with Beatrice. Asterisk, Harold often jokes that I should write a book about my experience, but I tell him that some stories are meant to be shared in smaller circles with people who need to hear them most. The elderly woman who thinks her daughter-in-law hates her, the adult child who's worried about making difficult decisions regarding aging parents, it's a person who's being gaslighted and starting to doubt their own perceptions. These are the people who need to know that they're not alone, that they're not crazy, and that it's never too late to fight for the truth. Asterisk, the most important lesson I learned from my time in that closet is this: when someone tries to make you invisible, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear. Stand up, speak up, and trust that the people who truly love you will listen when you tell them the truth. Asterisk, at 74 years old, I'm more visible, more heard, and more valued than I've ever been. And it all started with being brave enough to stay hidden long enough to discover the truth, and then being brave enough to step out of the shadows and fight for justice. Asterisk, sometimes the closet chooses you, but you get to choose when to come out of it. Asterisk,